With no further ado, I'm going to introduce A.E. Hines to you. He is the author of the collections Adam in the Garden, which was published by Charlotte Lit Press this year, and Any Dumb Animal, published by Main Street Rag in 2021. In addition to South Florida Poetry Journal, his poems can be found in the Southern Review, The Sun, Prairie Schooner, Alaska Quarterly, and many other journals. He received his MFA from Pacific University and resides in both Charlotte, North Carolina, and Medellin, Colombia. So you can see more about him at aehines.net, which I will put into the chat at some point, and as well as purchase information for AE's books. And at this point, I will turn it over to you. Welcome, thank you, and we're excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to see all of you, and I'm most excited to be reading with dear Dorianne. If you have not gotten her book, I assure you, you will be rushing out to get it in about 30 or 40 minutes after. So I will be looking forward to my reading and then shutting up so I can listen to Dorianne. My book, a shout out to Kathy Collins, who is my publisher and is also here tonight. And I'm very happy this book's been out. I think it's been in the world about a month now. And I'm very happy to have it in the world and happy to be with you guys. I'm going to read a few poems, I'll tell you when I get there, that were actually in the South Florida Poetry Journal. You guys have been very good to me. And I think there's at least 3 poems in the book that were first published by SoFloPoJo, and I appreciate it. The first poem I'm going to read is actually the title, or not the title poem, but the first poem in the book, and it's called Astronauts. It was dangerous then, making love in a Carolina backyard. First, the hammock threatened to flip us to the ground, taking with it my nerve. Then you gasped at the sudden reach of my hand, which woke your fear, but not our classmates asleep inside. I spread a blanket, and we undressed, silent, back to back, much like we would have in the locker room, each man piling neatly his clothes in opposing corners. The night was clear, the sky knitted with stars. We floated toward each other, summer astronauts on our first expedition, at first clumsy in our experiments, each of us taking our time as fireflies circled our naked bodies, like blinking satellites or distant moons, each of us edging closer to discovery we could not yet name. Thanks. So this book, despite the title, Adam in the Garden, if you're looking for a new take on the book of Genesis, you'll be slightly disappointed. The book has quite a bit of eros in it, and certainly quite a bit of outdoors, often eros in the outdoors. And a lot of it was written in Colombia, where I get so inspired by nature, which is where the theme and the imagery came from. And this is one poem that really is set there. It's called Breakfast in South America. A great blue-green bird follows me down into the garden this morning, darting from cypress to pine, sounding 4 sacred notes that echo up through the ravine like ancient calls to prayer. It's easy to stop and place a mango on the low stone wall, to watch him, watch me, watch him eat it. I don't know the bird's name, neon blue oval crowning his head, silver green teardrop at the tip of his tail. But every morning I walk out to find him waiting among the soft ringlets of pale green moss dripping from the trees. See beneath them new roots raking through the dark earth like God's own fingers. It's hard this morning to see the fresh orchids, speckled yellow and pinks bubbling up from the trunks, to see this bird propped among the red gold bromeliads still fusing with the branches. To remember this bright world, blue and green, is dying. Thanks. Incarnation. Before the body, Father, I was the lust in your myopic eye. Sigh of that coy child, the lunch counter waitress, who fetched you coffee and fried egg sandwiches for the months it took her to decide. Back then, I was still dust, ash rising in my own private universe of chlorophyll and sun, until I was the dust sucked up into her cornbread and boiled okra. Odds and ends she used to weave me into me. Tootsie Rolls and peanut butter cups, sun-steeped iced tea she balanced on her ripening belly as I quietly willed myself into flesh. You think you made me, Father? Taking that girl, slight and virginal, wedding her across state lines where officials asked no questions, then breaking her like a horse when she begged for tenderness, pleading for a hospital when the bleeding wouldn't stop. They say the dead should hold their peace. But what do they say of the not yet breathing, who stand and watch from the gate, who fall backwards into this world from their wombs to open their mouths and speak? A little change of tone. So I'm going to read the next three poems. All three of these first appeared in SoFloPoJo. So I'm happy to share them again. The first one is called On Monogamy. I actually think maybe Michael can confirm this. I think maybe all of them were in this Just Say Gay protest issue, but at least two of them were. And the first one is called On Monogamy. We were 6 gay men by candlelight discussing fidelity. Monogamy was a fad, someone suggested. Gone once there were drugs to keep us alive, tossed with our obsession for raising children and marriage, which had led to a thriving new industry for queer divorce. Then someone poured out the last of the wine. Someone else proposed firing up the hot tub. A man, not my husband, touched my hand, and another, not me, said honesty and trust were more important than faithfulness. I touched the muscled leg of my husband, which stiffened a little, as if we were dancing closer to a line we couldn't waltz back across. Then someone said he'd never toss a decades-old relationship over something so frivolous as an affair. My husband cleared his throat, and then the dishes. I followed him into our kitchen, and at the sink wrapped my arms around his chest. The washer beneath our counter was empty, but he handed me a towel so I could dry. And as the men undressed and slipped into our jacuzzi, we passed dishes between us the way we still handled each other. Gently, each chipped plate as precious as the last. Hopefully you guys still like that. You published it, but this next poem, it wasn't written for this person, but I've been reading it. I got to read, I was at SAS Fest. It was recently, and I read this in honor of, if you guys know the name Nex Benedict, non-binary student who was recently sort of beaten within an inch of their lives and then subsequently died in Oklahoma. And this wasn't written for Nex, but I want to hold space for Nex and all LGBTQ plus kids, particularly, that are struggling in the face of sort of the political climate that we as adults have placed them in. And this poem is called Postcard from the Dead. 10 years later, my killers, interviewed from their cells, will say Matthew Shepard needed killing. 10 years after that, my people lay my ashes to rest in the shining Capitol, under the stone ceiling of a vaulted cathedral, far from the fence in that naked winter field, from the icy prison of Wyoming. My killers thought I'd be forgotten when they offered me a ride, then bound my hands and placed that filthy bag over my head. But for 20 years, for 30, far longer than I was alive, our people remember my name. It blooms from their lips like a cold prairie rose. So I gave myself a little Easter egg in the book. So like every time you see the word friend in a title, it has something to do with betrayal. And this next poem, which, are we okay with a little snark? This probably falls in the snarky poem. And it's sort of self-explanatory, but this is one of those. And it's called To My Flirtatious Friend Who Made a Pass at My Husband on Facebook. You were right to call him beautiful. When I first saw him, I couldn't stop staring. Those soft hazel eyes framed by his thin wire spectacles, the fine toothy scruff of his beard. So yes, horny devil emoji does feel appropriate. When I awoke after our first night, the sun up making love to the room, I was afraid to open my eyes, the way a drunk fears being sober, wants to keep dreaming. When I did, I found no evidence he'd been there at all. The other side of my bed, so recently his, now crisp and remade. My sleeping hand reaching like that of the newly widowed into empty space. Did you write sexy? Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. One whiff that morning of the coffee brewing downstairs, my God, knowing he was still here, let me tell you, my friend, that was sexy. I wanted him then the way the beans long to be ground and pressed, then pummeled by relentless steam. Thanks. Adam before Eve. Adam too walked alone in the garden, feeding and naming the birds. This was before Eve, before the weather changed and leaves began to fall, before Adam hid his dangling bits in the down sprouting between his legs. I wonder if he could feel the coming change, marrow thickening in his hastily assembled bones, which days before had been drawn from the river of light. Did he notice the newborn sun setting earlier each evening, or the damp smell of rot overtaking his roses? Adam gave up on paradise too soon, started building parking lots and condos, strip malls and atom bombs, stopped going out each morning to shoo that sweet-talking serpent from the yard. Too late once the snake's legs fell off. 4 strange ornaments left hanging in that abandoned tree. And we'll go to a different paradise. Eden. I recall placing ripe plantain on the lowest branch of eucalyptus and the tree filling with small wings, toucans and motmots, a flock of miniature finches dusted with pale blue chalk. There are so few days I would, if I could, set on repeat and live over and over. Here, the man I love sighed of him a reviving breath, carrying plates of chorizo and fried eggs. Then the two of us reclined in dappled grass, drinking hot chocolate from a single chipped cup beneath prehistoric ferns that tower and sway just as they must have, with the world still new. I liked to pretend then too, didn't I? That we were the first and last of our kind, a multitude of wings beating the air under a sun that never set, our queer, middle-aged bodies, never a day older. Thank you. I'm going to read just a few more. You guys, everybody know what the term in legal parlance means for naturalization? I'm assuming everyone in Florida knows relative to immigration what natural. Can you guys hear me? Oh, I thought Lenny was doing a this. So you guys just generally, you guys know what naturalization means, process of coming to
I couldn't hear exactly what you said. I could hear your voice, but I kind of didn't understand what it was what words those were. What was it again?
Naturalization. So anyway, that's the title of this poem. We'd been lucky. I'd made it out of Guatemala alone with the baby, and the baby still alive. I hadn't let him crawl out a hotel window. I hadn't let him swallow a button from my sleeve. Managed to feed him and change him and carry him in taxis and embassies, through markets and airports, beneath the electric barbed wire of U.S. immigration. In Houston, I watched badged women and men berate brown men in shackles while they sat tethered to stiff chairs beside us. Most stared at their shoes. I am embarrassed to admit I did nothing, said nothing, didn't catch a man's tired eye and offer even a nod, a word of my feeble Spanish. Instead, I just called my little son's name over and over, bouncing him on my lap. Then we were ushered back into the land I'd promised, bound together by law and off to our next gate without a glance back at those men, detained, deported, on their way to whatever place they no longer called home. When I was working with Dorianne in my very first semester of Pacific, I can't remember what I was bitching about. I was complaining about something I didn't want to write, but that was maybe it was COVID poems. I don't want to write another COVID poem. We've had so many COVID poems. And Dorianne said something to the effect of, like, you better be careful. The muse will get very upset with you and you'll be completely hosed. And then I felt like Dorianne had cursed me for a good week and a half because I couldn't write anything. But I did write this, and the poem is called When the Muse Takes Umbrage, with my thanks to Dorianne. Not even the lesser goldfinch outside my window so full of sun can move me, nor the low-lying fog lounging on the valley floor all morning, refusing me the way I, in my youth, denied lovers an embrace after our final release, willing even then to share nothing more than pursed kisses, nothing untrue. I go in search of the honeybees, banging their cymbals, want to see them trembling the swamp mallows in the noon sun, but find their drums gone silent, the season already so late. Only the narrow wasps remain, uninspired, thrusting dumbly into those last blossoms, as if oblivious to scent, ungrateful for color. So be careful out there Here's another poem with the word friend in it, written for a friend. And this is going to be my last two. This is my penultimate poem, written for a friend. With the children grown, she fills their home with snake plants and jade, all the things that thrive on neglect. For a while, it's enough. Stifled kisses at their door when he leaves each morning, therapy on Thursdays. At night, melatonin, 2 drops of valerian on the tongue. The truth keeps its distance, clear as unfinished dreams at sunrise. House smelling of primrose and sage, the lingering scent of another woman. Sometimes she cannot read the words her heart keeps writing. The marriage not in trouble, but over. Hope, like smoke in the eye, blurs, robs her of context. And blinking, she averts her gaze the way the old saints must have when the angel of the Lord interrupted them mid-sentence, revealing his unstoppable message in splendor and light. Temporary blindness, not the point, but side effect of prophecy. Not rain, but flood. Her husband not going, but gone. Thank you. So I want to thank you again for having me. I really appreciate all you guys do for the poetry community and all you've done for me and the poems you've published of mine. I need to send you something if I could only write again, but that will happen. So this last poem, I guess I should say, now that I'm in my 50s, I find myself thinking much more wistfully about my 20s. And that's all I'll say to introduce this poem, which is called Sacramento, 1994. My neighbor wasn't wrong that Sunday she called the cops, said she feared the young man upstairs murdered by some other man. I did die that summer. 100 tiny deaths and cremated my shame. When I opened my door, 2 lady officers stood badged in black, one waving a finger at my half-open boxers, at my guest who came and wrapped his arm around my waist, wearing nothing but a towel. Was it wrong to climb the trellis of each man's body like a vine? I wanted to leap off and fly the wide open sky of my own body that summer, to Peter Pan my way through every coffee shop and light-dazzled bar. So when the cop said, "You boys go right on having a wonderful day," we did. Their black and white pulled away, and I leaned out my second-story window, 2 strong hands gripping my 2 strong hands gripping the sun-baked sill, opened the grateful cavity of my throat and crowed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, AE. That was wonderful. You just took us up and down the scales of emotion tonight, and I really appreciate your sharing your work with us.